Okay, let's unpack this. Psalm 19, verse 1. You know the one. The heavens declare the glory of God. And when you first hear that, you probably picture, well, the sky, right? Maybe stars. Seems pretty straightforward. But what if that word heavens in the Bible? What if it's actually surprisingly complex, more than meets the eye? That's really the goal for this deep dive. We've been looking at sources, digging into the original words shamayim in Hebrew.
And Oranos in Greek.
Right, to see what they fully meant. We want to pull out the key ideas, understand what the Bible really means by heavens, and, just as important, what it doesn't mean, especially when you compare it to, modern science.
Yeah, and what jumps out straight away from the sources is that these words, shamayim and Oranos, they aren't just simple labels like our sky or space. They're incredibly broad.
Broad, like multiple meanings packed into one word. Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's take shamayim, the Hebrew one. First off, it's grammatically plural, which kind of hints at different aspects right there. Sometimes it just means the air right above us. The atmosphere where birds fly, like in Genesis 1.
Right, it's the air.
Or where rain comes from. Think the flood story in Genesis 7. That's the everyday sky we see.
Got it. Literally the air. But it's also used for outer space, where the sun and moon are.
Exactly. Genesis 1, again, the lights placed in the expanse of the shamayim, the celestial sphere.
Okay.
But then, and this is crucial, separate from both the air and the stars, shamayim also refers to God's own dwelling place, that transcendent spiritual realm.
Like in Kings, when Solomon prays towards heaven.
Precisely. 1 Kings 8, heaven your dwelling place. Very clear example.
Wow. Okay, so air, space, and God's home, all potentially in that one Hebrew word. What about Oranos then, in the New Testament? Does it work the same way?
Largely, yes. And a big reason is the Septuagint. That's the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. It used Oranos for shamayim. So you see Oranos used for the sky where birds fly in Matthew 6.
Right.
And for the celestial realm where stars fall in Matthew 24.
And of course, the big one, the spiritual realm.
Absolutely. Like when Hebrews 9 talks about Christ entering heaven itself, Oranos. And that gives us the adjective Oranios, heavenly.
Ah, like your heavenly Father, emphasizing that divine aspect.
Exactly. Which kind of brings up how the biblical writers actually pictured the universe, physically speaking. The sources really emphasize they wrote from an ancient Near Eastern perspective, often picturing, a three-tiered cosmos.
Heaven above, earth, and then the netherworld below.
That's the common picture. And a key part is the rakia.
The firmament, or expanse.
Right.
Genesis 1 talks about it separating waters above from waters below.
Yes. And there's scholarly debate about what exactly they thought it was.
Was it solid? Like a dome holding back an ocean, which was a common idea then?
Or was it just space? An expanse where birds fly and stars are set. The sources discuss both views. But here's the important point. Regardless of the physical picture, accommodation. The idea that God, through the Bible, uses the common understanding of the world at that time.
Using the language and mental images the original audience understood.
Right, to communicate spiritual truth. The goal isn't a scientific textbook. It's revealing God's power and sovereignty using that familiar framework.
So thinking about multiple heavens helps here, doesn't it? Even if the Old Testament doesn't explicitly number them like 1, 2, 3.
It's a very helpful concept. You can see the first heaven, sort of the atmosphere.
Okay.
The second heaven, the starry cosmos.
And then the third heaven, Paul mentions that one.
He does, 2 Corinthians 12. Paul says he was caught up to the third heaven, and he links it with paradise, God's dwelling. Some sources also mention the heaven of heavens idea in the Old Testament, stressing God's transcendence over everything.
So if someone tries to map the biblical heavens onto modern astronomy, troposphere, stratosphere, outer space, it just doesn't fit, does it?
No, not really. The sources are clear on that. They aren't trying to give scientific layers.
Yeah.
The biblical language is, first, phenomenological, describing the world as it appears from Earth.
How we experience it.
Yes. And most importantly, it's theological. It uses those descriptions to tell us about God, His glory, His rule, His interaction with creation.
It's less about the exact scientific where and more about the theological what. What does this reveal about God?
Precisely.
Okay, so let's bring it back. Psalm 19.1, the heavens declare the glory of God. What does all this mean for that verse? It means it's not just about a beautiful sky or the stars, though they're included. It's bigger.
It seems to mean all these dimensions of heavens, the air, the cosmos, the divine realm itself, they all point to God. They are all, in their own way, declaring His majesty and design.
So here's something to think about. If the biblical heavens are less about a scientific location and more about theological reality, about God's presence and rule, how might that shift the way you understand phrases like our Father in heaven, or maybe the promise of a new heavens and new earth? What does that really point towards? Something to ponder.